You're listening to the Unlocking Africa podcast.
I'm founder, CEO of Rainbow Sports Global, a company that was founded 15 years ago and has been focused on connecting Africa to the global sports ecosystem.
I'm a partner and director with Rainbow Sports Global. Away from that, I'm former diplomat and passionate about the development of the African continent.
Once we identify the player, we need to put him through a stringent interview process that makes sure his characteristics beyond his playing qualities align with Rainbow's vision and Rainbow's way of doing things.
There's a growth in African talent. That interest in investment goes into the space that people are willing to put money where the talent is.
Stay tuned as we bring you inspiring people who are unlocking Africa's economic potential. You're listening to the Unlocking Africa podcast with your host, Tessa Adamu.
Welcome to the Unlocking Africa podcast, where we find inspirational people who are doing inspirational things to unlock Africa's economic potential. Today, we have two very special guests. We have James Woods and Kingsley Pungong, who are from Rainbow Sports Global, which is a global sports investment company covering the entire sports value chain, including sports franchise, ownership, management, and financing. Welcome to the podcast, James and Kingsley. How are you?
We're not bad at all. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having us.
Brilliant. It's a pleasure to have you on the podcast. I'm not sure if you've listened to the podcast before, but I usually like to start from the beginning. So I was hoping you can give us an introduction. Feel free to go first, James or Kingsley.
I'm Kingsley Pungong, entrepreneur of African extraction, to be specific, Cameroon. And I'm founder, CEO of Rainbow Sports Global, a company that was founded about 15 years ago and has been purely focused on connecting Africa to the global sports ecosystem.
Fantastic. Thank you for that.
All right, I'm James Woods, a Malawian national, I should say a global citizen, as we all are. So I'm a partner and director with Rainbow Sports Global. Away from that, I'm former diplomat and passionate about the development of the African continent through sports investment, or let's just say socioeconomic development of the continent.
So Kingsley, you mentioned that the company Rainbow Sports Global was founded 15 years ago. So what inspired you to focus on African football specifically?
Yeah, it was first of all passion. And secondly, it ties in with my notion of putting Africa first. I feel that a continent that is young, with over 60% of the population being under the age of 30, there were going to be more players coming out of Africa and more sportsmen coming out of Africa in the future than has come before. And I thought it was a rich area, a niche where one could focus and really make a difference in terms of building out the infrastructure and putting together the systems that will offer opportunities for these young people that we see as Africa's future.
Terza, just to add to what Kingsley was saying, I've known Kingsley for over a decade. So I've been involved with working with Kingsley for about that time period or so. But, the passion that Kingsley showcases to the global arena of African development is phenomenal. And it's a shared vision that we have. And just, adding on to that, it's, you look at Africa's raw talent in sport, this is both undeniable and underrepresented on the global stage. So the aspect of Rainbow Sports Global, this was recognizing that there is an opportunity not only to change the lives of individual players, but also to impact the communities, the economies across the continent positively. This was by investing not only in African talent, not only in exporting African football stars, but in contributing to the development of the local sports industry in the infrastructural aspect, the creating of opportunities, creating of jobs, inspiring the next generation, creating an entity, an Africa for Africans to the global arena.
So you mentioned in terms of the passion, putting Africa first, putting together the right infrastructure. At Rainbow Sports Global, you do have a unique business model that you're building in Africa. I was hoping you could elaborate on what that unique business model is.
The uniqueness of our business is that we put people first. Even though we have commercial aspirations, our aim is to make sure that every deserving player we come across gets an opportunity. And that's the cornerstone of what we do. And we also make sure that we control the entire value chain. And that provides us with opportunity to control the ecosystem. We send players to friendly clubs that we know that they'll have guaranteed play time. And we transition them putting their own interests first. I think that's the uniqueness of our business model.
Brilliant. So you mentioned about every player gets the opportunity. Obviously, there are some challenges to access those opportunities. So, what are some of the challenges you've faced in providing those opportunities in terms of signing emerging football talents from Africa and then directing them to those opportunities?
Significant challenges. First of all, Africa is a vast continent with most of it being rural, and it's broken infrastructure in some parts. So it's challenging finding talent. It's challenging finding them where they may reside, because some of these countries, you don't have organized leagues, you don't have organized youth leagues, and there are a lot of players that just play school football or street football who have the potential but never get seen. If you take the case of England, where every player probably from the age of 7 has been discovered, it's exceedingly difficult in Africa to find talent. That's one of the challenges. The second one is because of the lack of professionalism within the African ecosystem. You have the fragility of contracts, and it's also challenging in terms of enforcing those contracts. So it's even though it has a lot of upside, there's some significant challenges, but challenges that are not unsurmountable, and we're looking at every time to learn. Those challenges as well present a barrier for entry for competition. So from an entrepreneurial perspective, we embrace those challenges. While we work to solve them, well, we're hesitant to keep focusing on them.
Terza, just to elaborate a tiny bit further, I think Kingsley has hit the nail on the head with that, where he spoke about the many African countries lacking the sort of facilities and structured youth development programs, found more in the developed nations. But, there's also issues such as logistical issues, such as travel restrictions and limited access to these remote areas Kingsley was mentioning. These impede that developmental aspect that we're looking at. But another challenge, I should say, is also ensuring that our operations remain ethical and compliant with international transfer regulations, particularly when working with these young athletes. So it's crucial to work closely with families and local communities to ensure that players' interests are always at the forefront. So it's, understanding that cultural aspect. So that is, deeper immersion into those systems, because as for those who've lived on the continent, we know that when there is an opportunity for somebody to progress, particularly in this football terrain, at times you find challenges in how you get those families and entities aligned with the vision you have. So understanding those culture aspects has been extremely crucial, but we are applying those methods and, seeing success out of that.
Fantastic. So you did touch on a key point there, James, in terms of the process that you use to ensure that your scouting or recruiting of talent is ethical. Maybe we can go into a bit more detail in terms of what exactly you're doing to ensure that that process is ethical and effective at the same time.
Yeah, I think making sure that it's ethical is about just sticking by the rules. FIFA, who are the world regulatory body for football, have come up with a pretty comprehensive and stringent rule list that guide the identification, the trialing, and the exporting of African talent. And that also encompasses protecting minors, protecting families, and making sure that things are done above board. And we stick to these rules to the letter. And that's why we feel that we're going about the business the right way.
So once you've kind of identified this talent, you've followed the ethical process, what is in place in terms of internally with Sports Global to ensure the holistic development of this young talent or these young talented footballers in the system?
Fantastic. That's a good question. Once we identify the player obviously has a lot of potential. We need to put him through a stringent interview process that makes sure that his characteristics beyond his playing qualities align with Rainbow's vision and Rainbow's way of doing things. That includes psychological testing, that includes physical testing, that includes understanding his mind and how he connects to his body. Once all that is approved and rubber stamped, we now align him with where we see as an appropriate next step. It can be a university scholarship in America. It could be getting him into one of our clubs to have pre-development. And then we will now discuss with our placement network in Africa and globally to see what is the best opportunity to provide him with the right exposure that will give him maximum opportunity to showcase the talent.
Terza, we have what we call the Rainbow Way
Yes.
within the organization itself. So this is a comprehensive development program, which would include education, life skills training, mental health support. I think to remember that sports itself is also about your mental and physical state. So that is a key issue, as Kingsley was mentioning, how you prepare these athletes to cope with the pressures, the intensity, and the demands of competitive sports.
So would you say the holistic development approach that you use for young talent in Africa differs considerably to an approach you would use, say, in Europe?
Absolutely. It's totally different because the African athlete is different from the European athlete. The African environment is different from the European environment. And we have to customize African solutions. And that's what we're doing. It's totally different. And if you try and export a European solution on the continent, you probably just not succeed.
Interesting. So I guess further down the line, in terms of what you mentioned, the infrastructure not being in place and talent not being discovered, we know that sometimes it's more of an access and exposure issue in terms of talent being promoted and put in the spotlight. So if we can take it in a different direction, with what you do, where do you believe promoting or the use of, say, media solutions play a part in the strategy of first uncovering talent and then exposing them to a wider audience?
Media solutions, these play a crucial role in our strategy to elevate African football and its talents. Through ideas and partnerships with broadcasters, digital platforms, we aim to improve the visibility of African players, the leagues telling their stories to a global audience through our own platforms. This not only helps in promoting the players, the athletes, but also attracts interest from clubs, sponsors, fans worldwide, creating a sort of virtuous cycle that benefits the entire ecosystem. So our internal in-house, use of social media and content creation, this is designed to engage fans, build communities, drive support for these emerging talents, showcasing the sort of diversity of African football. So I think, the media solutions do play a major role in how the works of Rainbow and the works of development actually can be showcased to a global audience.
There's probably a few people better placed to provide an apt analysis on this whole media connection as James. So I'll let him to deep dive further into that if necessary.
Brilliant. Could you give me some examples of some of the recent work that you've done within this area whereby you feel that, say, a media solution has played a significant part in leveraging or opening up an opportunity or giving the needed exposure for a specific, say, football talent?
I think, Kingsley, I'll let you touch on this one if you can maybe touch on the combines we've had.
We've had several combines that are widely covered in Dubai, in Africa. We had a player recently, Farish Pemi, that just signed for Olympique de Marseille in France, from Bordeaux in Norway. He's an alumni. And that player was discovered in a fairly elaborate combine organized in Cameroon about 8 years ago in partnership with Crystal Palace and the Cameroonian FA. It was pretty high profile, and the media exposure allowed for players to come from far and wide. And one of these players was a young Faris that we later offered a scholarship to the United States to Montverde Academy in Florida, where he stayed for 2 years, polished up his English. We transitioned him to the United States Soccer League with Philadelphia Bethlehem Steel. And then he was signed to Christiansen in Norway, and later Bordeaux, where he became one of the best strikers in the Norwegian Premier League and in the European Conference League. And that has earned him a massive move to Marseille. We have a distinguished cohort, a distinguished alumni list from Patrick Alma, a young player from Ghana who has gone to Nashville. We have Daouda Amadou, Cameroonian, who is now signed to Colorado Rapids. And it's the flavor and the different places where they come from. We have Bobosi, a full international for Uganda, which is gone to Austin FC in the United States. We have Samson Dwe, was signed to Victoria Faisen in the Premier League. They were in the Champions League last year in Czech Republic. Bienvenue Kamakana Kimana from Burundi, that signed with the Premier League in Czech Republic. Gombe Faye, Central Africa International, that's signed in China. So there's a pretty impressive list of young alumni, and we might have a player that over the next couple of weeks might be in the top 4 English Premier League side. So that information will be made available to you at the right time.
So for people who aren't aware what a combine is, can you kind of explain what is a combine?
So basically, putting together a sort of event where we can showcase our talent on a sort of global platform within select countries. So as we mentioned earlier, that was in Dubai, whereby we bring together our athletes, our football players. We bring together sporting directors of football clubs, global football clubs, scouts. We bring together media personalities where they come and spend a couple days undergoing meetings, conferences, discussions of the development of sport, and also seeing the athletes perform in front of them and being able to assess and analyze the technical abilities, the skills, the performance of these athletes, giving them an opportunity to be able to sign with clubs directly from that combine itself. So it's very much how you would look at a conference, as you say, where, a group of minds come together to discuss pertinent issues and, walk out with solutions. So this is, in essence, football, whereby we come together with the hope that we form lasting relationships and able to showcase talent to offer them an opportunity for furthering their professional career. So through those sort of combines, this has gathered a significant media attention because of the sort of partners and attendees that have attended this, which has really helped in driving forward the vision of Rainbow Sports Global, and that vision itself being the development of these young athletes that we have. We also have, some other interesting stories, which, it may be a little bit early days to speak about, but, we would love to have a follow-up on a story that may be uncovering in the next week or two, which I think Kingsley will probably be more than happy to offer more insights into at a later stage.
Fantastic. So from what you've explained, it's clear that these combines give the much needed exposure to the young talent, which gives them global opportunities that potentially wouldn't have been possible previously. I guess we're seeing a lot more of this in recent years in terms of African footballers playing at high levels, whether it's in the US or Europe. This might be a very obvious question for yourself, but I'm going to throw it out there. Are you surprised by what African footballers have achieved globally so far, or do you think we're still underachieving and we could achieve far more in the near future?
So basically, the achievements of African footballers, this is remarkable and inspiring for us being African. We want to see more Africans achieve global success and become role models. But to be honest with you, it's not surprising for me at all, because the continent has so much rich talent. We look at players like the Mohamed Salahs, the Sadio Manes, Riyad Mahrez. We go back to the JJ Okochas, the Finidi Georges, the Sunday, the George Weahs. We're looking at a history of Africa developing absolutely top quality talent. Now, the successes are the ones we've mentioned. This is, testament to the talent that exists on the continent. And that talent itself is helping to increase the visibility of other African talents. But the only issue that, I have concern with has just been the lack of developmental structures at the grassroots level to really produce more stars, because I think we're only just touching the surface. Africa can produce a lot more stars than we have seen. You look at the Ballon d'Or, for instance, only one African player has won this. You look at the talent that has come out of Africa, you start to say that we should have more talent competing at that level, winning global accolades for the sort of talent and skill they have. But the challenge we have, as I said, that lays at that developmental level, that we need to invest in that infrastructure to really develop the next generation of stars that are able to compete with the Lionel Messis, the Cristiano Ronaldos, the Xavis, the Iniestas of this world.
I agree, James. As you mentioned, we've only had one African Ballon d'Or winner so far. Do you anticipate any future Ballon d'Or winners from the continent in the near future?
I would say, looking at the current crop of African footballers that are on the market, there's a couple exciting players, but it's the developmental process of what steps and levels they take their careers to next. And this goes back to the conversation we've been having about the holistic approach to development of talent. How is this talent developed? How do we prepare their mindsets? How do we nurture every aspect of their game, from professionalism, how they carry themselves, what they eat, what they do, how they train? There's all those elements. And as I said, going back to that, is that once those structures are invested at grassroots level and you're able to develop that from a very young age, we'll be able to see more people and more candidates from Africa potentially winning the Ballon d'Or. Looking at the current crop of players right now, one of my biggest concerns, which may be a little bit controversial, and I think both of you may disagree with me, is I find that Africa has gone through certain stages whereby you look at the 80s and the 90s, Africa produced absolutely sensational footballers, but unfortunately, the relationships and the connections and the networks with the global arena were not quite developed, where some of these footballers didn't have the sort of careers that we expected them to have. Or basically they signed the sort of contracts that didn't particularly support them in their vision of development. In more recent years, we've seen another sort of spurge of good talent coming out, with the examples of the Samuel Eto'os. Samuel Eto'o won the Champions League with Barcelona and Inter Milan. We look at the Yaya Toures. We look at the Sadio Manes, the Salahs, the Didier Drogba for what he'd accomplished at Chelsea. We see another generation of African players, but that sort of generation seems to have kind of died again. But now we're seeing another splurge of new talent that is developing, and more so, I would say, if you look at some of the talent we have at Rainbow Sports Global, I wouldn't be surprised in the next 10 years if we're talking about the next 5 to 10 years, if we're talking about some of those talents that we have unearthed, these little rough diamonds that we've unearthed that will be polished, and probably a few of them that could be considered for this. But it's all about this pathway and how they develop along that pathway. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Kingsley.
I think you're absolutely correct. I think people do not look at the reasons why that happened. We had a chain broken where FIFA basically outlawed the placement of under 18 players. That made it difficult. Players like Obafemi Martins and Nwankwo Kanu all went to big clubs like Ajax Amsterdam, Inter Milan, because they went through the reserve team. That wasn't longer possible. And so that disenfranchised a lot of African talent and basically created a very undemocratic arrangement. Things are changing now because that forced Africans to start producing their own players domestically to export and expose at 18. And we are just beginning to see the emergence of a lot of those young players that are coming after the generation that most left Africa prior to their 18th birthday. That's something we can dive into later, but those are the reasons. And I'm supremely confident that what is ahead of us is bigger than what has come before. I think the next generation of African players will actually be better than what has come before. Because it's just logical. There are more Africans living in cities now than before, so more players will be discovered. The advent of television has made the game even more popular. There are more scouts going to Africa, and Africa is investing in the infrastructure, and consciously that is contagious. East Africa is investing in its infrastructure. Big countries like Kenya are investing, Tanzania, and I bet you over the next 10 years, East Africa will have something to say in African football.
Oh, I look forward to that. I definitely do. James, you mentioned a key point there in terms of the underdevelopment of the global networks at one point between Africa and, I guess, Europe and the other global leagues. Would it be safe to say that African football stars are some of the biggest exports that the continent currently has?
I would say yes. I would say particularly, let's put it in the space of entertainment. I think Africa in the space of entertainment, which sports will be classified on that. So we're looking at musicians, artists, footballers. This is definitely one of the biggest exports that Africa has. So we look at, household names, as I was mentioning earlier, the Samuel Eto'os, the Didier Drogbas. You look at what Sadio Mane is doing in Senegal, from the building of hospitals to schools. He has created a sort of global phenomena around him as this complete athlete, but not only as a complete athlete, as a philanthropist. So what we're seeing with these African footballers is the sorts of works that they're bringing back into their home countries. I think it's all great saying that they are our greatest exports, but if we leave it at that, it becomes the issue of the sort of argument about the brain drain. But when we look at this, we actually say this is not really a talent drain. This is actually a talent gain, because what these exports have done with the successes of Didier Drogba, it grew an interest in Ivory Coast. The successes of Yaya Toure grew an interest in the Ivory Coast. The success of the Quinton Fortunes, the Benny McCarthy's, people start looking at South Africa. You look at the George Weahs, people are like, Liberia. And, George Weah is a whole different topic, because his success has also elevated him to become a head of state in his home country. So this global talent and this global aspect of exporting these African talents, we need to look at on the economic and the social aspects of what it's doing back for the continent. these athletes getting involved in developmental projects, foreign investment into their home countries, a catalyst for social and economic development, inspiring positive change. Well, the story is endless of what African talent that has been exported is doing back for the development of sport on the continent.
As you mentioned, with this comes a level of influence. So do you think we fully leverage, so to speak, the soft power that brings to propel Africa forward?
While significant progress is being made in leveraging soft power in African football, I still believe there's an untapped potential in using sport as a tool for social and economic development. Football itself, or sports in general, has this unique ability to unite people, to transcend culture and political boundaries, inspire positive change, in essence, be a unifier. But however, I would say is that maximizing soft power requires strategic investment in sports infrastructure, which we've seen not grow at a great pace. We look at strategic investments in youth development, a sort of heightened community engagement. So what I would say is that governments and private sector stakeholders or international partners really need to collaborate more effectively to harness the full potential of football soft power. This includes promoting African talent on a global stage, but also leveraging the popularity of the sport to address key social challenges such as education, health, gender equality. If we can really capture that, I think we can really leverage the benefits of sport as a tool of soft power.
So I guess from your experience being fully embedded in this space, are you seeing African governments starting to understand the importance of this soft power, or do we still have a way to go?
No, African governments are beginning to understand. Sports has always been at the center of the agenda of African governments, from Kwame Nkrumah developing a great Ghana team in the 60s to Mobutu promoting a lot of football in Congo and eventually bringing Rumble in the Jungle into Congo. African governments and heads of states have always used sports as a tool for political propaganda, youth engagement, and so forth. So I think more people are being conscious with the expanding youth population. I think African governments are aware of the power of sports. That's why everybody wants to use their scarce resources to host the African Nations Cup. So it's all right there. We'll see more development because many governments are eager to leverage the power of sports for the good of their own people and for their own legitimacy, basically. So I expect to see more involvement of African governments across the continent, not just in specific geographies.
There's certain points that looking at this element of soft power, because you look at the big nations, the Nigerias, Cameroon, Egypt, these sort of places have really leveraged the very element of soft power. But we've seen the rise of countries like Rwanda. You look at what Rwanda did with the Visit Rwanda partnership with Arsenal.
Yes.
They saw this as a great opportunity of utilizing that for soft power. But I think this, in my opinion, and, as I said, I'd love both of you to disagree with me, just coming from a sort of diplomatic background or governance background, I find that apart from specific nations, very few of the other nations are really manifesting or utilizing the extreme power that sport has. I think it's whether they need to really invest more into the sporting infrastructure and see how this soft power in sports really unlocks doors both locally, regionally, and globally. We also saw more recently countries such as South Africa looking at engaging with Tottenham Hotspurs. This itself was met with uproar in South Africa due to the cost of the partnership. It didn't go ahead. We saw Malawi itself get involved with a promotion of Visit Malawi and in La Liga, a project that both Kingsley and myself worked on. This was something that Malawi looked at promoting tourism, but I still believe that wasn't really leveraged very strongly by Malawi. I think a lot more could have been done. So I think what a few African countries need to look at what countries such as Ivory Coast have done by hosting AFCON. There's a whole argument about what's going to happen to the stadiums after the tournament, but that hosting of the tournament will have its benefits. It's put Ivory Coast on the map on the sporting arena. It's leveraged the right tools for using sports for developmental purposes. So I think there's still a long way to go, but I think that a lot more countries need to look at other countries as examples. And I think a great case study, in my opinion, would be to really look at what Rwanda has done with this Visit Rwanda initiative with Arsenal.
Thank you for that, James. I think, as Kingsley mentioned, African governments have always leveraged the power of sports. But I guess my question was, do you believe that they have used this strategically and consistently in order to move the continent forward via sports?
It's anything but consistent. I think that they do it in pockets. I think they do it sporadically. I think that needs to change. If it was consistent, then sports would have been developed across the board. I think we're going to witness some change because I think we're having more democratic governments. We're having some more stability across the continent. And I think sports, like most sectors, is going to align with that because everything is driven by a progressive political agenda. So I expect to see a difference over the next coming years.
Fantastic. If we bring it back to the basics in terms of the grassroots level, what are you seeing in your space in terms of the infrastructure on the continent being developed so that maybe in the future there isn't such a pressing need for African footballers to actually leave the continent in terms of developing the infrastructure of the professional arena on the continent?
Yeah, I think that there's the creation of the Africa Super League. There's some initiatives that are taking place. The African athlete shouldn't just be an export product. It should be a product for domestic consumption as well. The problem is how it's done. We have a political order now that is still not aligned with what Africa sees of itself in the future. For example, the African Super League, that is a very forward-thinking initiative and one that I applaud, is actually run by FIFA. So how is it an African solution? I think Africans need to come together and create their own solution, customized solutions for the continent, create their own leagues, branded African. I would like to see more of that as opposed to a top-down approach where people offer us a support just based on the political agenda. Everyone was talking about Qatar investing in Africa, doing stuff on the continent, the Aspire football dreams. Africans all voted for Qatar to get the World Cup, but I don't see any development that has taken place since Qatar got the World Cup. And so this might be a reminder for the Qataris to make sure that it's not just lip service people actually mean. Now, Saudi Arabia has emerged, supporting African initiatives, African Super League, yeah, which is good to see. But once I don't want the situation where once Saudi Arabia gets the World Cup, then it's lights out. So Africans actually need to build their own systems. There's no development without self-reliance. We have to be able to rely on self, build our own systems, brand our own systems, and create products that are good enough to compete internationally that will drive domestic consumption. If we do that, I think we'll be just fine.
Brilliant. I agree. As we know, that type of activity requires a lot of investment. So from the work you're doing, are you seeing increased interest and investments coming in to develop the professional sports or football space on the continent?
Yes, there will be increased investment. There's bound to be because the talent is just too good. And in sports, talent drives all levels of attraction. More European clubs are coming to invest in Africa. Governments are investing. Individual entrepreneurs with a passion and purpose are investing. So we will see a bigger swell of this over the next couple of years.
Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. And as your work cuts across quite a few verticals all aligned to football from within the value chain, such as franchise ownership, management, marketing, consulting, and financing, I'm sure you've experienced a lot within this space. So what are some of the key lessons that you've learned, things that you've seen during this journey?
I've witnessed firsthand the development and the respectability of African football increase with time. People were not taking us seriously. Scouts were reluctant to go to Africa. Africans were not signed for big clubs, were signed for fringe clubs. It's now changing. There's a young lad that has just left Senegal straight for Barcelona. There's another lad that has just left Senegal straight for Chelsea.
Wow.
European clubs are finding the biggest talent in the world wherever they may be, and that's very refreshing to experience.
Brilliant. James, would you like to add anything to that?
I agree with what Kingsley has said. But also, I think one thing that we haven't touched upon in terms of the interest and the development and the trends in African football is, a signing that just happened yesterday. This is looking at women's football. If you saw, I don't know if you saw this news yesterday. This was a Zambian lady, Rachel Kundananji, who has become the most expensive woman footballer in history, joining Bay FC from Madrid. This was a transfer of $860,000.
Yeah.
And I think, looking at that is showcasing to you the sort of interest that people have in African sport, in African talent, in African development. Because for myself, it makes me proud to the expensive female transfer is a Zambian player. You just need to look at last season. You look at Italy. It was the first time in the history of Italian football where both the male and female players of the year were African from Nigeria. And then you had Chawinga from Malawi playing for Inter Milan. So you had Napoli and Inter Milan players winning it. So it's showcasing that there's an interest in Africa to develop Africa. There's a growth in African talent. And that interest in investment, I think, goes into the space that people are willing to put money where the talent is.
Thank you for that, James. You've detailed the recent activities that shows a clear interest and increase of interest in African football. So maybe if you can keep on that trajectory in terms of what trends in African's football industry are you seeing that you're currently excited about?
For myself, there's a couple areas that are of extreme interest to me. One is the increasing professionalization of leagues and clubs across the continent, which is raising the standard of competition and attracting this audience. For a while, we kind of saw places such as South Africa, Egypt, with their leagues being seen as, the places to go play football in on the African continent. But now we're seeing a rise in other countries. Sudan has a decent league developing there. You go into Cape Verde is becoming a bit more competitive on their local scene. Interesting enough, just from this AFCON that's just finished, I was looking at Namibia. Namibia did not have a professional football league, but you look at the development of how the Namibian team performed at AFCON and the talks there that they're looking at implementing a fully fledged professional league again in Namibia. These are interesting trends to see the sort of development that is coming out of it. But also other issues is the growing usage of technology and scouting, I think maybe thanks to AI and such, which is actually helping in uncovering some of these unearthed gems in different parts of the continent. Still a long way to go, but those trends, I think thanks to technology, are giving better access to some of these talents at the grassroots level and in areas that people would not normally look at. As I said, the other trend for myself, it's once again, I'm looking at more recently. It's looking at what this AFCON has done for the continent. What AFCON has done, it's opened up a whole different market for people to look at markets that they wouldn't otherwise look at with how some of the teams performed. So it just opens up a whole terrain that this is a whole continent that has talent. Talent is not just left in specific pockets. It's all across the continent itself. Also, beyond that, I'm seeing the eagerness, some of the trends I'm seeing the eagerness of countries to have developmental academies, which myself and Kingsley have been having conversations on how best we can actually invest in a number of these countries. So the interest there, it's absolutely phenomenal with the sort of welcoming hands that people have on trying to see infrastructural development for academies to develop the next crop of players.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, James. Kingsley?
Yeah, so what actually excites me is the way African stakeholders are beginning to embrace technology. The other day, I was on a conversation with a company in England called AI Labs, and they do a lot of artificial intelligence and sports science and analytics. And I came to understand that this federation, the Senegal Olympic Committee, has ordered a mobile lab to the tune of about $2 million just for one of their facilities. I think this will only make African athletes better. It will set a new standard, and I'm very encouraged by what's happening within the space at this time.
Fantastic. So if we go past current trends and look at the future, where do you see the African football industry in 5 years' time? I know we're talking about 54, 55 different countries. Where do you see it yourself? What would the football industry look like on the continent?
No, it's going to expand. It's going to be bigger. If you look at the African Nations Cup today, it's on Sky, it's on prime time around the world in certain countries. That's significant development. I think we'll see more investment into academies. We'll see more investment into the African media. You can see what's happening in Togo with New World TV, where the government has invested heavily in media and they're buying rights all across the world. I think you see better infrastructure being built in terms of stadia. I think you see a lot of infusion of sports science, data analytics and it's all exciting, and that can only be better for African sports in general.
So basically on that, Terza, what we will envision on that is a greater commercial success for African football, increased sponsorships, media right deals, global merchandising. All these will help with the financial sustainability of sport on the continent. And this growth itself is not only going to benefit the players and clubs, but it will have a positive impact on local communities and local economies. So and I think with that will surely help with the narrative that all of us have always said, that football plays a role or is a catalyst for social and economic development in Africa.
Beautiful, and it's something I hope to see in the near future. Thank you for sharing that. If we look closer to home, where do you see you and the work that you'll be doing in 5 years' time? How will you be contributing to the overall development and growth of football on the continent?
I would say 5 years doesn't seem an eternity when you're on closer examination. We're excited by the next 5 years. We hope to have pushed out a great generation of Africans that will inspire. That's very important. That will be brand ambassadors for the continent. We hope to have partnered with progressive governments to build the requisite infrastructure. We hope that African athletes, through the work we would have done, will have the recognition they deserve worldwide. And we hope that a lot of young African executives will be part of the decision-making procedure globally in sports and in football. Those are the things that we want to always seek to achieve over the coming years.
Absolutely. I think over the 5 years, one thing I always say is turning our observations into obligations that positively transform these very societies we serve. So looking at how, how we can champion this development, how not only championing it, how we at the forefront of making it happen. And looking at that, it's something that I'm pretty excited about. And we know that this is a journey that we've all embarked on, not out of self-empowerment or motivated by money. It's been by the element of how best can we truly be the sons and daughters of Africa. So in the next 5 years, I think that's what we're hoping for, to see everything that we have discussed today come to reality, come to fruition.
Quote of the week.
As people, we often have quotes, mantras, African proverbs, or affirmations that keep us going when times are challenging or when times are good. Do you have one that you can share with us today?
Yes, use that.
All right. So, one African proverb that resonates deeply with me and guides my approach to the work I do and generally in life is, if you want to go quickly, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Now, this to me speaks the power of collaboration and unity in achieving lasting success and impact. It reminds me of the journey of developing, African football or personal development is not one to be undertaken alone, but together with communities, partners, family, friends, fans. The very essence of it is that together we can achieve more and ensure that whatever we set our minds to, and more so within African football, this can reach its full potential.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing that, James. Kingsley?
Because of your Nigerian heritage, I'll focus on Nigeria. There's an Igbo proverb that states, your anger and frustrations can cook yams. And for all the frustration that people have about Africa is difficulties, we need to look beyond and realize things. And to realize things, we need to focus on what really matters, which is developing a plan and an agenda, because just being frustrated will not cook yams for us.
Fantastic. I like that one. Thank you for sharing that, Kingsley and James. As I said, it's been a fantastic conversation, one that we've not had before in terms of African football and the development of young talent. So really appreciate you guys joining me today on the podcast. As we come to the end of the conversation, I was wondering if you have any closing remarks, final calls to action for people who are interested in the work that you're doing or just interested in football development on the continent in general.
Terza, I would say that, to everybody listening to this podcast, firstly, it's a thank you to you and thank you to everybody listening. A sort of closing remarks would be, the development and success of African football is a collective endeavor that requires the support and involvement of all stakeholders. So whether you're a player, a coach, a business leader, a government official, you all have a role to play in shaping the future of sport on the continent. So with this, it's like, encouraging everybody to get involved in these sporting initiatives, supporting young talents, advocate for investments in sports and infrastructure, let's work together for developmental programs. As I said with my African proverb, if we go alone, you won't go far. If we go together, we can accomplish a lot.
What a great way to close today's conversation. Thank you, James and Kingsley, for sharing your insight into Rainbow Sports Global's innovative approach to African football and football development. It's clear your commitment to excellence, talent development is making a significant impact inside and outside of the continent. So it's been a pleasure having you on the podcast today, and look forward to seeing how things develop in the near future.
Thanks for having us, and the pleasure is mine.
Perfect. So yeah, cheers. Thank you.
Thank you to everyone who has listened and stayed tuned to the podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share, or tell a friend about it. You can also rate, review us in Apple Podcasts or wherever you download your podcast. Thank you, and see you next week for the Unlocking Africa podcast.